Hey everyone, and welcome to another timeless video. Today I am going to be giving a bit of a tutorial, a bit of a lecture on how to mulligan in timeless and similar high-powered formats. Mulliganing is a very skill testing and important part of playing timeless, and it's something that I've noticed that a lot of arena players tend to struggle with. Mulliganing in timeless is very different than mulliganing in slower, lower powered, and more fair formats like standard and alchemy that you see on arena. So it's a skill that a lot of players do need to learn. So I'm making this video to hopefully help teach everybody. I've said before in the past, it sounds like an exaggeration, but I do think there's a shred of truth to it, that a lot of timeless players lose games when they cast their first spell, or even before that. And the reason I said that they've already lost the game when they cast their first spell is because mulliganing, sideboard construction, deck construction are very important, very skill testing parts of timeless. And if you make a mistake mulliganing, you can more or less throw a game away. So I'm going to go over my thought process as I mulligan. We're going to go over some examples together, and hopefully you are going to learn to be a little bit better at Magic. This is aimed at people learning Timeless, though it's also applicable to other high-powered, really fast formats. Also, this is a PowerPoint, not Arena. I've tricked you. So let's say for the purpose of example, we're playing the energy deck that everybody's been playing on Arena Ladder. This is a fair deck that is trying to win through creature combat, and it's very important when you do your mulligan decisions to understand your deck, how you're going to win, how fast you're going to win, how consistent, and how you are going to interact with your opponent. So let's go over all those criteria for this energy deck. What's our game plan here? We are a fair, aggressive creature deck. We're going to slam these creatures. They all cost 1 and 2, really aggressively costed, really cheap. We're going to slam them. We're going to turn them sideways. We're gonna have a nut draw with a Ragavan. We're gonna have a nut draw with a Guide of Souls. We're gonna have a nut draw with an Ocelot Pride. And we also have the backdoor option of grinding with this deck, which is awesome because we play both Chthonian Nightmare and Lurrus, so we can win games through this avenue as well. That's something we want to keep in mind. How fast and consistent? I've played this deck the most out of any deck on ladder, and even when your opponent interacts with you and they lightning bolt your turn 1 Ragavan, you're still winning on turn 5 and 6 if you have a dense draw of creatures. And if your opponent is playing another creature deck that gums up the board, it will go slower, but you can overcome with your Chthonian Nightmare. But with a minimal amount of interaction, just like 1 or 2 removal spells, and then your opponent doesn't put too many blockers up, yeah, you're very consistently winning on turn 5, turn 6 with this deck. So let's also think about what this deck does to interact with our opponent. We are in the Mardu black, white, red colors, so that means we have access to black discard spells, which are very strong against a bunch of different decks. We have access to red creature removal, which is strong against some decks, does nothing against others. We have access to cards like Static Prison that exile any permanent, which is sweet. And then we have specific hate pieces in our sideboard, which are tailored to fit the meta and decks that we are weak against. I'm not going to go over sideboard construction now. Let's just assume that we have these things in our sideboard. For the purposes of example, we also need to understand what we're playing against. So for the example, we're playing against show and tell. And every single time you make a mulligan decision, you need to consider what your opponent is playing against. If you watch my videos where I post me playing like ranked and I'm really high mythic, I always think about what my opponent's playing. If it's game 1, I look at their companion and I try to figure out what their deck is. And if I don't know that, then I make the mulligan decision as best as I can. But if it's game 2 and game 3, I always know what my opponent is playing, and I will always consider it when I'm making the mulligan decision. So the show and tell deck, what are they trying to do? They are an A plus B combo. They need to cast a show and tell with an omniscience in their hand. That's more or less it. And once they put the omniscience into play, they can win with a ham sandwich. As long as they have any spell that draws cards or digs through their library, they're pretty much guaranteed to win once the omniscience hits the battlefield. They're very fast. Speedy Gonzalez deck, they could do it on turn 3 if they just happen to have all of the cards in their hand. And even if they don't have it in their hand on turn 3, they play a bunch of draw spells, a bunch of dig spells, a bunch of tutors. So you bet that they're going to get it together on turn 4 and turn 5. So how do our two decks interact with each other? Unfortunately, they don't. If you go back a couple slides and you look at how I had the Mardu deck set up, I'm not playing main deck discard, so I don't have a way to mess with their combo. We don't interact, and the unfortunate part for us is that they are a little bit faster. When I said how fast are the decks, our deck was winning on turn 5, turn 6 very consistently, but their deck can win as quick as turn 3. There is no nut draw on the Boros deck that wins on turn 3. So that is a problem for us. So one last thing to consider before we get to mulliganing is what cards are good against them in our sideboard. I just said Thoughtseize, very good. We also consider cards in the main deck, of course. If Thoughtseize was in the main deck, we would be considering it as well. So we have Thoughtseizes, which are very strong against them, and the reason that it is strong against a combo deck is because they are an A plus B combo deck. They need both A and B in their hand when they try to win the game. So if we Thoughtseize them and we take B and they only have A, they need to now cast a tutor or a draw spell to try and get B again. And in order to do that, it's going to slow them down. We also have Deafening Silence, which is good, which can slow them down. I have another slide on Deafening Silence next, so we're going to get to that later. And then we also have some backup, like Emergency could maybe interact with Show and Tell cards, but I wouldn't count on them. Static Prison is one of them. If our opponent casts Show and Tell and they put an Omniscience into play, you could put a Static Prison into play and it'll exile the Omniscience. Though a lot of Show and Tell decks are built to beat that because they play board upon a win, so don't rely on cards like this, but you can consider them when you mulligan. So let's think about how good our sideboard cards actually is. As I said before, they're an E plus B combo. They just need 2 cards in their hand, 2 specific cards. If we slam a Deafening Silence and we put this onto the battlefield, they now become an A plus B combo, still need the payoff. They also need interaction with us. And the interaction that this deck usually plays is Force of Vigor. So they very specifically need Show and Tell, Omniscience, Force of Vigor, an extra green card, and a draw spell in their hand. That's 5 cards. Now that is harder for them to assemble. It's pretty much impossible for them to naturally have that on turn 3, and it's going to take them quite a few turns to dig through their deck and find all of those pieces, especially considering Deafening Silence is limiting them to 1 spell per turn. So it's slowing down how they even assemble their combo. So this is a really, really, really good card. Putting this card in play is the difference between, oh, they win on turn 3 and we win on turn 6, we're going to lose every time because they're faster, to, hey, their deck is now stumbling and they're putting their combo together only on turn 6 or turn 7. We can win faster than that. And as I said before, we're not trying to shake them off forever because they do have cards like Force of Vigor. They can't answer our sideboard cards. If we Thoughtseize them, it's not like we permanently removed all copies of Show and Tell from their deck. They can still do it, but we've delayed them to make them slower than our deck to give us a chance. Because without sideboarding, they're going to win turn 3 before we've even dealt 10 damage to them. If we Thoughtseize them, we take the important card, and then they take 5 turns to reassemble their combo, we kill them. That's simple. It's simple as that, as they say. All right, it's been 10 minutes approximately, and we still haven't gotten to actually talking about mulliganing. So let's go ahead and go through some sample mulligans together. I'm sorry it took a little bit to get here, but you know the phrase, don't give a man a fish, teach him to fish. I'm trying to explain why we're going to mulligan. So hopefully you can do these decisions by yourself and not have to reach for a sideboard guide every single time that you play a specific deck. All right. Here's your opening 7. After doing the Yunky Splinky, we have indeed drawn 7 cards. We know we are against Show and Tell. Let's say we're on the play. It doesn't particularly matter with this hand. We're against Show and Tell. Are you going to keep this 7? Think. Pause the video real quick. I am not going to keep this 7. And I posted this because I think this is a hand that's going to trick a lot of arena players and a lot of people who are not used to mulliganing to specific sideboard cards. This is a hand that has a mix of lands and spells. We have 4 spells, 3 lands. That's optimal. If you're playing draft, you're going to keep this every single time. If you're playing standard, you're going to keep this. You know why you might be tempted to keep this? Because we have Amp Raptor and Unstable Amulet together. Those are 2 cards that work very well together. We have the Nightmare and the Brewmasters. Those are 2 more cards that work really well together. These are cards that let us grind the long game. We're gonna win if we get to play all of our cards, right? Think. We're against Show and Tell. If we don't kill them before like turn 5, they're just going to combo. We need to stop their combo, so we cannot keep this. The only way this hand has a chance of winning is if Amp Raptor just gets super lucky and hits into a Deafening Silence or something like that, or we just happen to draw a sideboard card and then our opponent happens to stumble. But that's a 5% chance to happen. We're not doing that. So here, 6 cards are better than this 7, even though this is a totally fine 7 to keep in game 1 against a random opponent. So in game 1, I would also think about, hey, could I be against an unfair deck? Should I mulligan a little bit deeper to have some 1-drops? Let's mulligan this. 7 new cards. Will you keep 6 of these? Pause. Think. Sorry, getting a little silly here. This is perfect. This is a perfect 6 here. And let's talk about why it's a perfect 6. We have two pieces of interaction, and we also have our two fastest, most aggressive threats in the deck. Both Guide Whistles and Ocelot Pride are 1-drops, so we can deploy them both on turn 2, and they instantly start snowballing. We're going to instantly start generating energy. We're going to start creating extra creatures. We're going to be able to put the pressure on our opponent really, really fast, and then we interact with them in two different ways. If interacting with them once pushes them back from a turn 3 combo to like a turn 5 or 6 combo, interacting with them twice is going to push them back to turn 7, turn 8, and then we are very, 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 very favored at this point. This is a obvious example of a very strong 6 that I'm always going to be happy to keep. And since we have all 1-drops here, how I would particularly do it is I would put the mountain back and we would keep these particular 6 cards because we really only need the 2 lands. And then one other important thing that you want to think about when you keep these sorts of hands is sequencing and exactly what order you're going to play your cards. It matters less here, but if we had 2-drops in our hand, we would have to consider, okay, are we going to have the mana to cast all of these things, and what order do we want to cast these things? Here, what we can do is we can cast the turn 1 Thoughtseize to look at what is in their hand to take any interaction that might kill our Deafening Silence or kill our creatures early. And then turn 2, based on what we saw with the Thoughtseize, we can play Guide of Souls followed by Deafening Silence or Guide of Souls followed by Ocelot Pride if we have time and we don't need Deafening Silence on the board immediately. If we had like 2-drops in this hand, we have to rethink that. It might be a little bit awkward. You might think about keeping 3 lands in that case. So always think about your sequencing and what order you actually want to play these spells. And the fact that we have the Thoughtseize and the Silence, and the Thoughtseize to inform our sequencing, increases our win rate by a lot. All right, example number 2. I presented you with 7 cards. Are you going to keep these 7? Water Break. Yep, this is an obvious bad hand where unfortunately we got screwed by RNG. We do have our 2 most explosive 1-drops, but we have 5 lands. We don't have the sideboard pieces against the unfair deck, so we are going to knock this back. If this was game 1 and we were on the play against a random opponent, you could maybe keep this. On the draw, you would really never want to keep this. And against show and tell, when we know what we're playing against, yeah, we got to find those sideboard cards. Go to 6. Are you going to keep this 6? Think about it. I'm taking another sip just so you could think. Now, this is a tough one. I'm going to be honest with you. This is one of these mulligans that if I saw this hand in game, I would think about it until the rope showed up on Arena, because this is really interesting. Every single time you mulligan, it's super punishing. When you go from 7 to 6, and then 6 to 5, and then 5 to 4, your win rate drops pretty significantly for each card you lose out of your hand. Of course, 7 to 6 isn't a big issue. We can all think of times that we mulligan to 6 and 1. Happens really frequently. Even mulliganing to 5, you still win sometimes on 5. But if we're going to go to 4 or less, it's not it, boys. I don't think you could really win at that point. It's very, very rare. So now that we're on 6, we'd be going to 5 after this, which is really sus. I don't see our sideboard cards here, which is a reason to want to go to 5. However, in this example, we have probably our best, most aggressive nut draw. If we are on the play here, we can go turn 1 Guide of Souls, turn 2 we use Second Guide and Ocelot Pride, generate an extra creature token, generate so much energy. Turn 3, we play an Amp Rapture, we hit another threat, we can pay energy with Guide of Souls twice because we're going to have so much energy. We're going to have the aggressive nut draw that keeps our opponent dead on either turn 4 or turn 5. This is kind of crazy. So if we were on the play, I would keep this instead of going to 5, because I think us killing our opponent by turn 5 at the latest is going to be faster than they kill us on average. I did say the show and tell deck can win on turn 3, but they're not going to do that pretty frequently. Their average turn to win is closer to 5. So if we're going to kill them on turn 4 or turn 5 on the play, we're good in that scenario. It's at least better than mulliganing to 5, and we might end up keeping an even crappier hand with close to 0 chance of winning. Or we just keep a hand that has sideboard cards and no action, and then we just sit there waiting to draw a threat, and our opponent wins on turn 16. That would also really, really suck. So if we're on the play, I think this is a pretty simple keep. I would put one of the Amp Raptor back. I have that slide, right? Nope, I don't have that slide. If we were on the play, I would put one Amp Raptor back because this is the nut draw. If we were on the draw, I would probably mulligan this, which is tough. This is one of those marginal decisions because even on the draw, this is the nuts. This is very fast and it's worth keeping. So let's say we hypothetically do mulligan because we're on the draw and we go to 5. Are we keeping this 5? The answer is yeah. We are keeping this 5. We've 3 sideboard cards and an Amped Raptor. And Amped Raptor is awesome because it lets us get the card advantage back. Amped Raptor is essentially a 2-for-1. You get the 2/1 Raptor, and then you get to cast another card out of your deck. It's awesome. It's how you rebuild from mulliganing. So this is fantastic. But my question to you, the viewer, is this is an obvious keep, but what 5 cards are you keeping? Sip of water. Big sips. So the specific 5 that I would keep, go to next slide, is we keep 1 Thoughtseize, 1 Deafening Silence, 1 Amped Raptor, and the 2 lands. We need the 2 lands to cast our spells, of course, so we don't want to keep just 1. The reason we kept a split of Thoughtseize and Deafening Silence is because I know my opponents on Show and Tell, and their main sideboard to fight my sideboard cards is Force of Vigor. Force of Vigor says destroy up to 2 target artifacts and enchantments. So having a second copy of Deafening Silence doesn't do anything. That's why I'd rather split the Thoughtseize and the Deafening Silences. We also went down to 1 Amped Raptor because it doesn't make sense to keep 2 Amped Raptors because then that would force us to keep only 1 land, and then we would be top decking hoping that we hit it. I would much rather keep it like this. And let's say we do our Thoughtseize turn 1 and then we happen to draw our 3rd land. Well, now we have a fetch that we can use to get a Surveil land to hopefully filter our draws to make sure that we don't flood and that we are actually able to kill our opponent in a reasonable time frame. I think even though you mulligan to 5 here, you still have a good chance to win against Show and Tell because you have 2 pieces of interaction and the Amp Raptor should rebuild your board. And if you don't top deck horrendously, you should still be able to kill them on like turn 6 or 7 with your energy cards. And through 2 sideboard cards, it's probably going to take them that long to do their Show and Tell thing unless they get very lucky. So I think you have a really good shot here. And that's it. That's the video. We only did 2 examples, but the point with this is to more teach you the idea behind how you make these mulliganing decisions and how you make these sideboarding decisions as opposed to going through every specific example with you. This is, in my opinion, the difference between somebody who ends up wallowing and languishing at like 80 something percent mythic, even though they play a crap ton, and somebody who goes to the moon and ends up at the top of the ladder and ends up smashing some tournaments. So hopefully this was eye-opening. Hopefully you learned something. If you've been playing paper vintage for 20 years, no, you didn't learn anything, but you're an arena player who's new to Timeless, hoping to get their win rate up. Hopefully this was some really nice insight for you. Thanks for watching, folks.